close your eyes. Actually, don't. You need to see where you're stepping. It's a Tuesday in August, roughly 82 AD, and the humidity in the Subura is thick enough to chew. You're sitting on a freezing slab of punched-out marble, shoulder to shoulder with a stranger who reeks of garum, that fermented fish sauce they put on everything. No stalls, no scrolling on your phone, just 40 dudes grunting in a circle. Then comes the communal part, the xylospongium. A sea sponge on a stick soaking in a bucket of stagnant salt water. You use it. Vero used it. Everyone used it. Your modern immune system? It's a joke. One wipe and you're a walking petri dish. It's a miracle the empire didn't collapse from the sheer weight of its own intestinal parasites. Probably because the engineering was better than the hygiene. Barely. Rome is a scab. You peel back the travertine and there it is. The wet, pulsing reality of the Cloaca Maxima. It's 600 BC, give or take a decade of tyranny. The valley between the Palatine and the Capitoline is a swamp, literally. If you tried to build a temple there, it would just sink. Like that scene in Monty Python, but with more dysentery. So they dug. They didn't have CAD software or excavators. They had muscle, Etruscan architectural secrets, and a terrifyingly good grasp of gravity. The engineering was arrogant. That's the only word for it. They lined the tunnels with massive blocks of lapis gabinas and tuff. No mortar, just weight and geometry holding back the filth of a million people. You can still see parts of it today near the Forum Boarium if you look closely at the riverbank. It's dark. It smells like damp earth and ancient trapped echoes. When the Tiber rose, which it did, constantly, like a bloated yellow snake, the pressure inside those tunnels was enough to make the stone sing or scream. Depends on if you were standing over an open drain at the time. Anyway, you look at the arches, the Opus Quadratum. It's beautiful in a haunting, I hope this doesn't collapse on me kind of way. Agrippa later spent his own money to boat through these sewers just to prove he could. Think about that. A statesman, one of the most powerful men in the world, rowing a boat through a river of human waste. That's the Roman ego. If you can't conquer the smell, you just claim you own it. The system was designed for drainage first, sewage second. It was about keeping the city dry. The toilets, they were an afterthought, a secondary connection. You've got these massive, sophisticated arteries underneath, and then these tiny, precarious veins leading to the public latrines where you're currently trying to survive. It's a mismatch, like putting a Ferrari engine inside a cardboard box. And the water, it never stopped. The aqueducts, the Aqua Marcia, the Aqua Julia, they were constantly bleeding into the system. It wasn't about flushing like we do. It was about a continuous, violent flow. If the water stopped, the city died. Simple as that. The sound was probably deafening, a low, constant roar under your feet while you're trying to buy some cheap wine or vote for a corrupt senator. Everything in Rome happened on top of a whirlpool. It's a miracle they didn't all just wash away into the Mediterranean. Wait, actually, some of them did. Usually the ones who tripped. So you're sitting there, shoulder to shoulder with a guy named Lucius, who definitely hasn't bathed in 3 weeks and smells like fermented fish guts and old sweat. There are no partitions. Forget privacy. That's a modern luxury, a neurosis we invented later. In a Roman forica, privacy was a sign of a conspiracy. If you wanted to hide, you were clearly plotting to kill a Caesar. So, you sit. You stare at the guy across from you. The seats are marble, polished, cold. Freezing, actually, until 20 other backsides have warmed them up for you. There's a hole under you, obviously, but also a little keyhole-shaped slit running down the front of the stone bench. Why? For the stick. We need to talk about the stick.
The xylospongium. It's a terrifying word for a terrifying object. A sea sponge tied to a wooden stick with some twine. That was your toilet paper. And no, you didn't have your own. It sat in a bucket of heavy brine or vinegar at your feet. When you were done, you grabbed it, did what needed to be done through that front slit, and this is the part that makes my skin crawl. You put it back in the bucket for the next person. Imagine the microbial nightmare. We're talking E. coli, roundworms, whipworms, a literal buffet of intestinal parasites. Archaeologists found these eggs in the soil samples of Roman latrines. They weren't just dirty, they were biological warfare zones. Romans thought the vinegar cleaned the sponge. It didn't. It just pickled the bacteria. And the sound. God, the sound. You've got the constant rushing of the water in the channel beneath you, that endless flow I mentioned earlier. But it's punctuated by the human elements. 50 people in a room, all eating a diet heavy on grains, chickpeas, and cheap wine. It wasn't a quiet place. It was a roar of acoustics. The stone walls bounced every splash, every grunt, every wet thud right back at you. It was social. People conducted business here. They made dinner plans. "Hey, Marcus, want to grab some dormice tonight?" All while Marcus is reaching for the communal sponge. Wait. If you're enjoying this descent into the literal bowels of history, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button. Or don't. I'm just a guy talking about ancient sewers, but apparently you're the one listening to it. Your choice. Back to the nightmare. You'd think the biggest danger was the filth, right? Wrong. It was the physics. See, the Cloaca Maxima was a masterpiece, but it wasn't perfect. Methane gas is a bitch. It builds up in dark, enclosed spaces where organic matter decomposes. Every now and then, a pocket of gas would drift up from the main line, find its way into a public latrine, and meet a stray spark from a nearby torch or a kitchen fire. Boom! Literal explosions. Imagine sitting down to do your business and being launched 3 feet into the air by a pillar of fire from the underworld. It happened often enough that the Romans were genuinely terrified of their own toilets. They didn't think it was gas, though. They thought it was demons, or angry gods. They actually put statues of the goddess Fortuna in the bathrooms to protect them. Think about that. You're so scared of your toilet exploding, or a stray octopus crawling up the pipe, yes, that's a recorded thing that happened in Spain, that you need a divine guardian just to pee. There are graffiti drawings in some of these places, prayers to the gods, essentially saying, "Please don't let the fire beast eat my transition today." And then there are the rats. The sewers were a highway system for the ratus ratus. These things were huge, well fed on the city's refuse, and they didn't mind a little swim. There are documented accounts of people being bitten while occupied. You're sitting there, vulnerable, and suddenly something with teeth and a tail decides you're an intruder in its tunnel. The engineering of the latrine itself was quite clever, though. The seats were usually built over a deep trench with a constant stream of water diverted from a nearby aqueduct. This water carried everything away into the cloaca, which then dumped it into the Tiber.
Simple, elegant, horrific. Because where do you think people got their water for washing clothes or occasionally drinking? Further downstream. The Romans understood clean in a visual sense, but they had zero concept of sterile. They loved their marble and their grand arches, but they were living in a petri dish. Let's look at the Aqua Crabra. It was a stream that Agrippa diverted to help flush the city. It was violent. It was loud. If you dropped your ring or your dignity down that hole, it was gone. Swept into the Mediterranean within 24 hours. There was no trap in the plumbing. It was a straight shot to the river. But here's the kicker. If you were rich, you didn't use these places. Not usually. The elite had private latrines, but even those weren't safe. They weren't connected to the main sewers. Why? Because the elite didn't want the smell of the Cloaca Maxima backing up into their villas, and they definitely didn't want the exploding methane. So they had cesspits, basically a giant hole under the floor that slaves had to empty by hand. I'd almost take the exploding toilet over the hand-emptied cesspit. Almost. The public ones, the foracae, were for the masses, the plebs, the travelers, and they were everywhere. Near the forums, the baths, the theaters, they were a necessity of urban density. Rome was the first city to hit 1 million people, and you can't have 1 million people without a plan for the byproduct. If you walked into a latrine in 150 AD, the first thing that would hit you wouldn't just be the smell of waste. It would be the ammonia. It was thick, stinging. Romans actually collected urine in big vats at street corners. Why? Because it's a cleaning agent, full of nitrogen. They used it to bleach togas. So you've got the smell of the sewer, the smell of the laundry vats, and the smell of 50 unwashed bodies. It's a sensory overload that would make a modern person faint. But they just sat there, talking about the grain dole, talking about the latest chariot race at the Circus Maximus. They were tougher than us, or just more accustomed to the reality of being a biological entity. We've sanitized our world so much that we've forgotten that we're basically just tubes that process food. The Romans lived that reality every single day, shoulder to shoulder, sponge in hand. Wait, I just remembered. The sponges. Sometimes they were rinsed in the little channel of water running at your feet in the latrine. Not the sewer channel, there was a second, smaller gutter in the floor with clean water. You dipped the sponge there. Except that water was often just recycled from the sink where people washed their hands. It's a loop, a disgusting, perfectly engineered Roman loop. You look at the ruins now, the beautiful brickwork of the Ostia Antica latrines, and you think, how organized, how advanced. And it was. It truly was. But the gap between the architectural order and the biological chaos is where the real history lives. It lives in the parasites, the methane, and the shared sea sponge. You wouldn't survive it. Not because of the smell, but because your immune system is a pampered 21st century child. One afternoon in a Roman foraca, and you'd be dead of dysentery before the sun set over the Capitoline Hill. But hey, at least the seats were marble. Classy. Narrowly avoiding a methane blast while discussing politics? That's the peak of civilization. Anyway, I need a drink. Something bottled. Something definitely not from the Tiber. The ground beneath your sandals isn't just dirt. It's a crust. A thin, calcified scab over the greatest engineering feat and the greatest horror of the ancient world. The Cloaca Maxima.
the greatest drain. It's not just a sewer. It's a cathedral of filth. Wait, let me rephrase. It's an artery. A massive vaulted stone throat that's been swallowing Rome's sins since the 6th century BCE. And you're sitting right on top of it. You feel that? That faint hum? That's not the city traffic. It's the sheer volume of water, millions of gallons, hurtling through the dark towards the Tiber. But here's the turn. Here's where the advanced engineering becomes a nightmare.
The Cloaca Maxima didn't have traps or P-bends to keep the gases down. It was a direct line, a highway for everything you don't want to see. You're sitting there, debating the price of wheat, and suddenly the air in the latrine changes. The pressure drops. Methane. It builds up in those lightless tunnels, thick, invisible, and highly flammable. There are actual accounts, recorded history, not myths, of literal flames shooting up through the holes in the marble seats. Imagine that. You're just trying to exist, and the sewer decides to spit fire at your exposed underside. And then there are the visitors. Elian wrote about this. A wealthy merchant in a seaside town found his food disappearing. Every night, gone. You know what it was? An octopus. A giant, hungry cephalopod that had crawled up through the sewer pipes, through the latrine hole, and into his house. Think about that next time you see a quaint Roman ruin. It's not just the smell. It's the vibration. The realization that you are physically connected to a dark, subterranean ecosystem of rats, eels, and explosive gas. It's the sound of the water, a roar that never stops. In 33 BCE, Agrippa literally rowed a boat through these sewers to inspect them. A boat in the waste. The scale of it is sickening. You aren't just using a bathroom, you are participating in a violent, high-pressure industrial process. The stone is slick. The air is poisonous. One spark, one heavy rain, one wrong tide from the Tiber, and the whole system backflows. Everything the city tried to forget comes rushing back up, through the hole, straight at you. It's a miracle they didn't all die of pure, unadulterated terror. Or maybe they were just too busy holding on to the wall to care. God, I can almost hear the splashing. It's deafening. Let's get out of here. Seriously. I feel like the floor is about to give way. I'm done. My skin feels greasy just talking about this. But it makes you wonder. If the peak of Roman engineering was just a high-speed highway for octopuses and methane, what happened when you actually got sick? If the plumbing was a literal death trap, imagine the surgeons. You think their medicine was any cleaner? Any more logical? It wasn't. We're talking crushed beetles, vinegar-soaked lead, and things that make the Cloaca Maxima look like a luxury spa. Was a Roman doctor more dangerous than a Roman sewer? You tell me. Actually, don't. Wait, tell me in the comments. Subscribe if you've got a strong stomach. I'm going to go wash my hands now. For an hour, at least.